Hi everyone, Janelle here. I'm a functional nutritionist and doctor of natural medicine. This is my podcast where we talk about midlife wellness in the mountains. I love today's talk with my friend Robyn Spens. Robyn explains why boundaries are so important, yet challenging for women. She describes the 3 things needed to make successful boundaries and even gives us tangible examples at the end to help us set our own boundaries today. You are going to love this. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Robyn. I am absolutely delighted to have you here all the way from London today. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So you and I have been colleagues for a few years now, and I have really always admired the incredibly strong, calm, and confident vibe that you bring to everything you do, Robyn. So I imagine that has something to do with your clear boundaries. But I would love to start off with asking you, why did boundaries become your jam? Like, why are you really all about boundaries?
Yeah, I wasn't always so calm, and that's a great question. I think my work around boundaries started because of not having them in my life. I think this was stopping me from achieving some of the goals I had set for myself. So I think really through a process of work on myself, because I do a lot of work around mental well-being. And I think through a process of working on myself, I understood that boundaries had to be a part of my life in order for me to move forward. And so not having boundaries in my life meant that I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to say no. I was a fully paid up people pleaser. And so I didn't know how to stop prioritizing others over myself, or I didn't know how to really prioritize my health over other commitments. So bringing boundaries into my life and understanding them, and then, doing a lot of work on them and mastering them within the work that I do privately has really helped me to change the parameters of my life and for me to achieve a lot of the things I wanted to achieve.
What does it mean to have clear boundaries? Like, what does that even mean if people don't understand what we're even talking about?
Yeah, I think setting boundaries and having boundaries in your life is really important because it teaches you how to stand up for the things that are really important to you. So I think setting boundaries requires practice. It's an art. It's just like learning any other skill. And I think boundaries is like this delicate balance between like saying yes to others without saying no to yourself, right? So this boundary is like this internal guideline. Maybe if I define it as a limit to establish a fine line where, you don't say no to yourself, but you also understand that sometimes you have to say no to others. It's a guideline. It's a line in the sand, but it's also from a loving, caring place.
Yeah, I think that's really probably an important thing to remind people because for a lot of people that probably is confusing that it is from a loving kindness place and that not compromising yourself is okay and important. We don't want to compromise ourselves. Like saying no is okay. And as women with estrogen, that people pleasing hormone, I think it's challenging.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of establish, safe interactions with others, right? And a boundary is different from a demand. It's different from a
Mm-hmm.
request, right? And it only requires you take action. When you make a demand, you're telling the other person what to do. Don't do that. That's a demand. That's not a boundary. But if you say, listen, when you shout at me, it makes me uncomfortable. That's a request. You're asking someone to buy in and to stop shouting because it makes you uncomfortable. That's a request. Now, a boundary is, if this person continues to do something that makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to take myself out of that. It doesn't require that the other person buy in. It doesn't require that the other person do anything. It's what I'm going to do when I feel uncomfortable or when I
Mhm.
feel that I need to take myself out of this space because something is happening which doesn't sit well with me.
And that seems really empowering because you're not requiring anyone else to make changes. You're saying, "Okay, this is my thing, and I'm going to be responsible for me and not
Absolutely.
demand something from you."
Absolutely. Boundaries are empowering. Saying no feels fantastic when you learn how to do it. And from a person who was a people pleaser who didn't know how to say no, even when it was detrimental to me, learning to say no is so empowering. Learning to advocate for yourself is empowering. And that's something that I think women are not always taught to do because we're taught to be nice because
Mhm.
nice makes people like you.
Mhm.
And this ideal around being nice, being a good girl. I think a lot of women of my generation were raised with this kind of comprehension, and so I think when you learn to actually advocate for yourself, being nice doesn't equate people liking you, or being nice is not being nice is not being mean, or saying no
Yeah.
is not being mean. Then you take your power back.
You know what's so fascinating? There's like so many dimensions of this because what you're just saying is so important. And so there's that component, pleasing people. And there's also this part of boundaries. Like for me, I started learning about boundaries in parenting, as some classes that I took. And I think everyone can probably recognize these points at various places in our life. But, I remember my kids would push and push and push and push to do something. And I would let them because I didn't know what my boundaries were. I wasn't holding them. And then I would lose it. I would
Mm,
lose it. I would just yell and everything was a disaster then. Then they were dysregulated. I was dysregulated. And had I backed it up and just held my boundary and been okay with saying no, like you're saying, like, no, you
yeah.
cannot go up the slide again. No, not right now. And just really held that boundary, it would have been so much easier, then I could have been regulated and they would have been dysregulated and that would have been a lot cleaner. So relationships, like you were saying, with, a partner and adults, a relationship with your kids. I talk to my teens about boundaries now. And here's the thing that I think is interesting, and you tell me if this is right. I don't feel like you can hold your boundary or know your boundary in the moment. It's like you need to set boundaries before you go into life in different situations. Do you teach
Yeah.
that? Like, is that right? Because I have to be clear of my boundaries and I want my teens to be clear of their boundaries before they go into these situations. Do you know what
So
I
I'm gonna
mean?
Yeah, I do, and I'm gonna answer that in two ways.
Okay.
So as far as parenting is concerned, as parents, I think modeling healthy boundaries is crucial for teaching your children to be emotionally resilient and self-respecting like themselves and individuals, because if we teach our children how to set healthy boundaries when they go out in the world, it makes them able to say no to people who are encouraging them to do things we don't want them to do. So I think demonstrating how to set and maintain boundaries is a valuable life skill for your children as they grow older. But modeling that in the home, I think, helps your children to understand how to set boundaries. And so, this question you're asking, do I need to know how to set boundaries before I go out in the world? If you're modeling that behavior to your children, then they're learning in this safe environment how to set boundaries. And then when they go out into the world, they can set them for themselves. And then the ideal of, yes, that's what we do in the Boundary Club. We learn how to set a boundary. We learn what it is. We learn the different kinds of boundaries. And then we play, we kind of practice setting boundaries. And then I make my clients aware that there is pushback, because people don't like change. And so when you start setting a boundary, you're going to get the pushback, and you've got to be able to sit in the discomfort of someone saying, well, why do I have to do it this way? Or you lent me money a lot. Now you're saying no. And we have to sit in the discomfort of them not liking the boundary or not liking the thing we're asking them to do. And I teach my clients how to do that. So we practice boundary setting in a very safe space. And then they're kind of pushed out into the world to kind of practice and come back. Let's talk about how that felt to set a boundary. And then I push them back out there to start saying no, to start setting boundaries where it doesn't matter so much. And you build that skill. Is like a muscle. You build the muscle.
What important work, Robin. I just love that you do that because I think one of the coolest thing about boundaries, besides the fact of just having them and the health of that, is that once you understand this concept, there's so many aha moments. Like it's been years now for me that I keep being like, "Oh my gosh, that's the whole concept of boundaries in a whole new area of my life." So like you might not understand it for a while, and then as soon as you get the idea of it, it resonates, I think, in every area as of your life. From I mean, I know you specialize a lot in alcohol, and so relationships, alcohol, all of these different things. I mean, it's just amazing. So I love that you practice that with people. I think that's just such really important work, and I just wanna thank you for that. It's really cool that you do that and that you specialize in that.
Well, some people see boundaries as negative, you see.
Mm, mhm.
So they see them as bad things, like a boundary is a barrier, is a push. And it's not, it's like knowing what the expectation is from another person. So if we apply, I love that you say how this can is applicable in so many areas. So if we think about if you are working for someone and you're in this relationship with your senior management or your boss, it's like knowing where you stand and knowing what the boundaries and parameters is makes your life a lot easier. But if you go in and you don't know where the parameters are, where the boundaries are, you're always kind of in stress because you don't know what you're doing and where you're going. So knowing what the boundaries are in a relationship helps. People know
Mhm.
where they're not mind reading, right? Because when we expect people to mind read, that's where it goes a bit wrong, right?
I mean, so true. There's so many things that I think we could just dive into that gets me so excited, but what you said was so neat because when we have boundaries, we're calm, you said, and when we don't have boundaries, it's so stressful because we've compromised ourselves, and it just feels icky in some way or another. So I just think that's really important because stress impacts every part of our health. So I want to feel more calm. So I am always working on my boundaries and what they are and holding them so I can stay strong or calm. But this is really cool because in midlife, as all of my listeners know, because that's what I really specialize in, when our hormones really change, progesterone drops, estrogen drops, everything changes. Who we are changes. I mean, really. So even if we had good boundaries, which most of us probably didn't, we are going to need new boundaries, I think. Do you agree with this? Like in midlife, we're probably going to find that we have different boundaries because things change so much.
That's a great question. And I think boundaries evolve, of
Mhm.
course. The boundaries maybe I had in my 20s are not really applicable now. So boundaries, I think, evolve, and they evolve because, there are so many changes which are important in midlife. But there's also the kind of external boundaries, the boundaries we set with people on the outside. And then there's the internal ones, the ones we set with ourselves. And
Mm.
I think those become really important for a lot of women. It's like keeping your word to yourself. right? Around your health, around the things that you do, around how you treat yourself. And I think those boundaries are really become really important at this time of life. Just keeping your word to yourself, learning how to prioritize yourself, learning how to be kind to yourself, right? Learning how to eat well, how to go to bed and get your sleep. These are the things, what I call internal boundaries when we are
Mm,
keeping the word to ourselves. And I think
mm,
when we master that, it becomes easier to set boundaries with others.
yeah. Again, like we just need to be aware of this concept because estrogen drops. That's that people pleasing hormone, right? So I work with so many women who no longer tolerate things from their partners and who no longer want to keep making choices for themselves that have felt good for so long. So if they don't understand this concept of boundaries, I just feel like it seems like you're going insane. But if you understand both, hormones will make me prefer new things, different things, and I can set clear boundaries. I think it's going to be a lot more successful than not understanding what's going on, not understanding you have this ability to set boundaries. And what you said, like all those, what was the term you used for personal boundaries? Like
Like internal boundaries
internal
versus
boundaries. Ah, I
the ones
like
we keep
that.
with ourselves rather than the external ones, the ones we set, when things around our parameters with other people. And so those
Yeah.
internal boundaries are really keeping your word to yourself. And as
Yeah.
our lives change, yes, maybe things change for us, but then we learn to set boundaries, not to
Yeah.
start a war. And there's a way
Yes.
to set boundaries. Boundaries need to be clear. They need to be kind but firm. We're not going out there making demands and starting a war. That's not what boundaries are.
Mm,
Boundaries are very kind. Boundaries are clear. But, there has to be a way to set them. And we have to also be mindful and give grace because people aren't going to always understand our boundaries when we start to set them, right? So if
mm.
you've been doing something one way for a long time, like when I stopped, drinking alcohol, people were, what? Pushing back. Why? And all of that. And it's like, okay, I know I've done this in the past, but now I'm not going to do this. Is that all right with you? I'm going to come to the dinner party, but I'm not going to be drinking. I'm letting you know ahead of time. Is it going to be all right if I still come? Clear, firm, and kind.
Yeah. So I definitely want to get into eventually tips you have for how we can set these boundaries. But before, are there areas that you encourage people to examine? Or is it really just so different for everybody? How does that work? Like if someone came to you, are there areas you would encourage them to set boundaries in specifically or no?
Well, I think it's kind of having that call with someone or a conversation with someone to see the areas in which they feel, you know, uh, are lacking. If I'm the person that's always never can say no, and I'm overextending myself, and I'm in the office late every night because I can't tell my
Mhm.
boss no, then finding that's something we need to work on. How you start setting boundaries around in your professional life, or if I'm someone that can't say no to my children, or I can't get them to do the things that they want to do because I'm not maybe setting boundaries with my children and in the household. That may be something we focus on. And then, the third scenario is if I'm doing things, for not doing things for myself that I should be, right? Am I setting boundaries around those things so that I can achieve what I want, in my personal health? So it's where is the boundary needed? And then
Mm.
how can we hone in on that and set some parameters and some steps so that we can practice that and grow that and change the behavior and a shift in the behavior, start disrupting that pattern of not setting boundaries and building the muscle of how to set them.
Okay, so you said some really great areas I think that will be helpful for people to think about their own life. So you said work, there could be boundaries at work that people need to make. There could be boundaries in the home. So your kids, your partner. there could be internal boundaries. So those boundaries that you were talking about, alcohol, bedtime, all of these really important things to take care of you and your health. Friendships, I'm sure there are boundaries. Other family members, I bet that's a really big one. Like,
Friendships and
parents,
families are mine.
siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I bet
And
those get lots
in-laws.
of pushback.
In-laws is another big one.
Yeah.
Friendships are an interesting one. When people are late all the time and they leave you waiting, you're
Mm.
frustrated and you may be snarky. And rather just saying, look, I love that we are good friends, but I'm left waiting for you consistently. So, I know that you may have some things going on with your timekeeping. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait for you for 15 minutes or 10 minutes. And if you're not here, I'm going to go. And I hope that's okay, right? That's
Mm.
setting a boundary around your time. And that comes up a lot in friendships,
Mm.
or the pressure of maybe eating things that you don't want to eat, like we go
Yeah.
out and my friends are pushing me to drink and eat things and they know I'm on a diet. Why aren't they respecting that space around me? So I might have to set a boundary that says, you know, hey, I'm super glad to go out with you, but I'm not going to be doing this or this, and I hope you can respect my decision.
And I'm
That's a
sure
boundary.
that's really hard for a lot of people.
Yes, it is.
So, what
But
are
I can
some
help you get good
tips?
at it.
Yeah. What are some tips that you have so you kind of explained how to think about your life and what areas you might need boundaries in. So then if someone wants to start setting some boundaries, what are some tips that you have?
Well, I think get really clear about the boundary you want to set
Mm.
and, maybe write down, what it is that you want to say to that person. Start small, start setting boundaries where you're not going to encounter a huge blowback. Because that will scare you and make you think, ooh, I don't want to do this because it's really scary. And it's not. It's just building that muscle.
Mm.
So, if your food is not cooked well when it comes back in a restaurant, learns to say, I'm sorry, this is cold or, whatever you need to say. That's a small and significant one. Start there. Or with your children, little tiny boundaries until you build up. With your partner, setting some boundaries if that's necessary. But little things, when you say yes to things, start saying no when you mean it. And then
Yeah,
you start to build the muscle. Three things you need with a boundary. You need clarity. People need to know that this is or is not what you want, and you need to be clear about it. And you need to say it with kindness. It's not a threat,
I
right?
bet
It's
that
not a
first one is hard and takes a lot of practice because I know when I get nervous about something, I don't always say it in the way that I had hoped to. And so I think I love that you said start small, something that you're not maybe emotionally attached to,
exactly
s- so you can say it clearly and calmly. So clarity, that's the first thing. I love that.
clarity. And don't say it when you're emotionally charged or when you're angry. Not it's yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother thing that comes out very, quite wrong. And then it creates, other problems. So, you know, calm, calmly, clearly, and with kindness.
Mm. So are those the three things?
Yeah.
Clarity, calmness, and kindness.
Yeah.
And I imagine just having some grace for yourself in this process is really important, knowing that you're going to not do it how you had hoped every time.
And I talked to a client just yesterday, and she was kind of being not bullied in the gym, but people were, making fun of her and she had been laughing along with it, right? And when she, said she was uncomfortable with it, she just shouted something out. And then she
Mm,
was stressed about it. And I said, "Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. They got the message." And then
mm,
time you'll say it better. So I help people work on the language they want to use with boundaries too, right?
mm,
So, we work on the language until they feel more comfortable to create language of their own that feels comfortable for them. So I say it's okay. You got your point across and you'll get more eloquent in setting your boundaries, but people are clear. that, this is not funny. When you say these things, it makes me feel really uncomfortable. Could you stop doing that, please?
Mhm.
Right?
I mean, that's just
Or
so empowering.
yeah. And you're gonna feel uncomfortable. But it's learning to sit in that discomfort of other people not being okay with what you've just said. And I think that's the biggest thing for women,
Mhm.
sitting in the discomfort of people not liking what you've said. But you've
Right.
said it clearly, you said it kindly, and you've been firm.
So I think it would be really helpful. I mean, do you think you could give a few other examples? Like, I think that one was really helpful. So when someone's saying something that makes you feel bad, that is a great example of a place that someone needed a boundary. So what are just a few other examples? I mean, anything.
Maybe when an argument escalates and you might say, when you shout or when you raise your voice, that makes me feel really uncomfortable. So I might leave the room if you do that. And I'd love for us to sit down and have a conversation about this when you're calmer.
Mm,
But if
yep.
you're going to scream and shout, I'm not going to stay for that, or I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to disengage from this conversation. But I want to talk about this when you're calmer.
Yeah, and
But
I
then
imagine there'd be
you have
some
to follow
pushback.
through.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to follow through.
Mhm.
And that doesn't require the other person to buy in.
Mhm.
If that doesn't happen, then you've gotta leave the room,
Mhm.
right? You gotta
Mhm.
follow through.
Mhm.
And the worst thing you can do is not follow through on your boundary,
Mm.
because then you open up yourself for your boundaries not to have weight and to be meaningless.
Mhm. Yeah. And then you mentioned one earlier about when you have a friend or someone who is late all the time. Can you give us an example of what you would say to them?
Yeah, it's sort of I love, meeting you for coffee or meeting with you. But, you've been late several times, and that's okay, I'm not, putting it out there that you about your timekeeping. All I can say that, I'm gonna wait for 10 minutes and, then I have to leave, and I hope that's gonna be alright,
Mm.
and you gotta leave if they're late.
Mm.
So my brother is late all the time.
Mhm.
I mean, he's cleaned that up, but he's chronically late, and I used to say to him, "You got 15 minutes," and he'd
That
get furious if I left, but
mm.
he stopped being late.
Mm.
Or
I
he'd
mean, you
call.
sounded so calm and kind when you started that all of those out. Okay, I'm really enjoying this. Can you do one for a boss at work that might be expecting too much from you or abusing your time or something like that?
Yeah, I think and you when you address someone who's, where there's a power dynamic,
Mhm.
just be sure that you're comfortable with what you're saying, because a power dynamic can be a funny one, right?
Mm,
They're your boss, or if it's a dynamic of a female male boss, maybe, there's something there that feels really uncomfortable,
mm,
right? So, be very sure of what you want to say before you start to talk, or seek help from HR, human resources. That's what we call it here. I think you call
mhm,
it something else. So, seek some support on that. But, it's kind of saying, I love, that you want me to stay late, but I can't do it every week, or I can't do it every day. I'm sorry. I have things I have to do, and that's not part of what I'm supposed to do.
mhm, mhm.
Or I
Brilliant.
know that you rely on me to do this, but actually I can't do it on Thursday.
Mhm,
I have to find someone else, or, you know, but
mhm.
you've got to know the positioning when you say things like this.
Right. So again, it goes back to establishing those boundaries beforehand and being aware of what you want to say going into it, not just being in the spot, not just being in the moment, but practicing a little bit beforehand. I think that's probably a
And
really
it's
important
also
step.
knowing what kind of company you work for, because those companies that say we are a family
Mm.
run, because that means that
We'll
family
abuse you.
have boundaries.
Okay, Robin, I have another one for you. Speaking of family, okay, how about family, in-laws or something that want you to do something that you need to set a boundary around? How could you say something to an in-law?
Yeah, so, the in-law may be showing up at your house when they're not supposed to, or maybe criticizing your children or doing, overstepping the mark. And it's like, we know you love him or her, or you love us, but could you please not do that? We want to do the parenting, or if you continue to do this, maybe we can't come over as much as, we used to. We need you to kind of respect the things that we're doing with our children and not override us or, disrespect what we've saying. And so it just depends on the
Mhm,
scenario.
mhm.
Could you please stop doing this because and let us do this part of the parenting? And I hope that's okay. I know you mean well, but we'd like to sort this out and talk to our child ourselves, or we'd like you to not involve yourself in this, and I hope that's okay. We know that you
I
mean.
love this, and something like that would sting a little bit, but that's okay because you were clear, you were calm, and you were kind.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
it might
okay.
sting a little bit, but then they might step back and say, "Oh, wow, we were interfering."
Right, and that's opposed to you feeling horrible every time you interact with them, and you're not agreeing with what they might be saying or doing to your children. So,
And it creates resentment. So when
yeah.
you can advocate, this is when advocating for yourself or for your children or for your household or for your situation, especially at Christmas and when all these, gatherings when people come together. I mean, Thanksgiving is a huge one for you. And when people come together, it's being able to advocate for yourself and saying, we love being with all of you and we love doing all of this, but maybe we're not doing this, or maybe we're leaving earlier, maybe we're not coming to every, meal, or, our kids don't eat this. So please don't serve it to them. It's asking kindly, firmly, but, but being very clear ahead of time. So not putting people on the spot.
Mhm. And as you said, start small. That's a really important step. So I just think those are really tangible and powerful tips, Robin. I think those could change people's lives absolutely for the better. So I mean, obviously you agree this is your life's work. But
And food, I think you
mm,
work in the area of people, you
mhm,
know, how they eat and how they sleep, and just saying, I'm delighted to be part of this party, but I'm not going to be eating certain things, or I might be bringing my own food. I hope that's okay.
mhm. And it's
Right.
funny, even, my current boundary that is kind of silly sounding, but it's something I'm working on, which is I always used to do races in the mountains. And since I've shifted really close to menopause, I don't wanna race anymore, but it's this habit that I have. I keep doing it, and I keep showing up, and I keep thinking, "What the heck, Janelle? You don't want to do this. I'll end up on start lines with all of these people and all of this pressure." And so it's taken me a few years, and now I just have to hold this very strong boundary of I'm not racing at all, and then maybe when I get good at that, I can dabble again, but for now, so maybe that's part of boundaries too, is for now I have to be even a little more black and white than maybe I hope to be in the future where I can be a little bit more gray. Time will tell, but that's
I
the
think it's in
boundary.
the gray, right? That's impressive that you race, but it's kind of saying to yourself, like, Janelle, if you do this racing, what are the consequences of that?
Right.
Right? So, right, if I do the race, the consequences for my body might be blah, 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 and that might prevent me from doing this with my children,
Yeah.
or it might prevent me from having this time, or, I might be in bed for 2 days, or whatever the outcome is.
Right. Right.
So it's looking at it from a different lens, right? If I don't do this race, these are the benefits. But it would have if I do, these are the consequences,
Mhm.
which might have an impact on X, Y, and Z, right? So how do I keep my word to myself here?
Yeah, weighing the pros and cons and then being clear. And then how do you, yes, exactly. Keep your word to yourself. I love that, how you phrase that. But I just threw it out there as like, that seems like kind of a silly thing, but it's all about boundaries and holding myself accountable. So there's just so many parts of our lives that this can impact, from, really intense to seemingly superficial ones, but it still is all about our happiness and health. It's brilliant, Robin. So is there anything that you would want everybody to know about boundaries? What would you scream from a mountaintop?
They are important, and boundaries are not a bad thing. We all need boundaries in our life, and learning to advocate for ourselves is a good thing, and especially women.
Amen. It's so important. Thank you so much for your work, Robin. If people want to learn more about your Boundaries Club or find you, how can they do that?
I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. It's the Boundary Club, or it's Robyn at robynspens.com. You can find me.
Great. And I'll link that in the podcast and on YouTube for everybody. Thank you so much, Robin. I'm so grateful for your work. I'm so grateful that you came to talk to us. And thank you so much.
It's been so much fun. Thank you for having me. It's been a delight, and I really appreciate you having me. So thank you, and thank you to all the people out there who listen to you. It's an amazing podcast.
And everyone's going to have better boundaries now. So thanks, Robin.
You're welcome.
Bye bye.
That's it for this week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a comment and review, as that helps more people find out about it. You can find me and the courses I teach at mountainrebalance.com and on Instagram. If there's a topic you want to hear about, please reach out and let me know.